The ground shook under Hana Kim's feet as another explosion lit up the dark sky above planet Kepler 442b. She pressed her back against the broken wall and tried to catch her breath. Her military uniform was torn and covered in dust from the collapsed building that had nearly crushed her an hour ago. Blood dripped from a cut on her forehead, but she ignored the pain. Right now, staying alive was more important than worrying about small wounds. Through the smoke and debris, she could see her squad, mates running toward the evacuation point. The blue-skinned Veltar soldiers moved fast on their long legs, while the shorter Zephyrian troops used their forearms to carry wounded comrades. Everyone was heading for the bright lights of the shuttle landing zone about 200 meters away. The sounds of battle were getting closer as the Nexari forces pushed through the human defensive lines. Hana tried to move, but a heavy piece of concrete had her left leg pinned against the ground. She had been trying to free herself for 20 minutes, but the chunk of building was too heavy. Her teammates knew exactly where she was because she had been calling for help on the radio. Lieutenant Park Jiho had answered her first distress call and promised they would come back for her. That was 45 minutes ago. The Nexari were unlike any enemy the coalition forces had faced before. These insect-like creatures stood 7 feet tall on 6 powerful legs. Their bodies were covered in thick black armor that could stop most small arms fire. Sharp claws extended from their front limbs, and their heads had large compound eyes that could see in almost complete darkness. They made clicking sounds when they communicated and moved in perfect coordination like a hive mind. What made them truly dangerous was their numbers. For every Nexari warrior that fell in battle, 3 more would take its place. They bred quickly and seemed to have no fear of death. Human military experts estimated that the Nexari controlled over 50 star systems and were expanding their territory every month. The coalition needed every soldier they could get to fight this enemy. Hana was one of only 12 humans in her mixed species squad. Most alien commanders considered humans to be useful, but not essential. They were good at following orders and could adapt to different environments quickly. However, they were also seen as fragile compared to other species. A human soldier could be replaced more easily than a Veltar warrior or a Zephyrian specialist. She activated her radio again and tried to contact her squad leader, Commander Quinn Thor. The tall Veltar had been leading mixed species units for over 10 years and had a reputation for being practical rather than sentimental. His blue skin was covered in the ritual scars that showed his rank in Veltar society. Like most of his species, he believed that emotions were a weakness that got soldiers killed. Her radio crackled to life, and she heard Commander Quinn Thor's deep voice cutting through the static. He was clearly running as he spoke because his breathing was heavy and rushed. Behind his voice, she could hear the sounds of weapons fire and shouting. The battle was not going well for the coalition forces. "Commander, this is Lieutenant Kim Mabar. I'm still trapped in Building 7 near the communications array," Hana said into her radio. "The piece of concrete on my leg is too heavy to move alone. I need assistance to reach the evacuation point." There was a long pause before Commander Quinn Thor responded. His voice sounded different now, more cold and distant than usual. "Lieutenant Kim, the situation has changed. The Nexari have broken through our main defensive line. We are conducting an immediate evacuation of all personnel." Hana felt her heart start beating faster. She had been a soldier for 6 years and knew what those words really meant. The commander was telling her that the mission had failed and everyone was retreating. But that did not explain why no one had come to help her escape from the collapsed building. "Commander, I understand the situation, but I still need extraction from my current position," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My leg is pinned, but I am not seriously injured. I can fight once I reach the shuttle." Another pause, followed by the sound of an explosion in the background. When Commander Quinn Thor spoke again, his words made Hana realize just how desperate their situation had become. "Lieutenant Kim, we have multiple wounded soldiers who need immediate medical attention. The shuttles are at maximum capacity. We cannot risk additional lives for one soldier." The meaning of his words hit her like a physical blow. They were leaving her behind. After 6 years of fighting alongside these aliens, after proving herself in dozens of battles, after bleeding for the coalition, they were abandoning her because she was trapped. She was not wounded badly enough to need immediate medical care, but she was also not mobile enough to reach the evacuation point on her own. "Commander, please, I just need 2 soldiers to help move this concrete, then I can make it to the shuttle under my own power," Hana said. She could hear the desperation creeping into her voice but could not stop it. "Please do not leave me here." "The decision has been made," Lieutenant Commander Quinn Thor replied. His voice now sounded like he was reading from a manual, rather than talking to someone he had served with for 2 years. "We will mark your position for possible future rescue operations. Good luck, soldier." The radio went silent. Hana stared at the small device in her hand as if she could not believe what had just happened. She had always known that human soldiers were considered expendable by many alien commanders, but she had thought her squad was different. These were people she had shared meals with, people she had saved in previous battles, people who claimed to respect her abilities. Through a gap in the rubble, she could see the last shuttle lifting off from the landing zone. The bright blue flames from its engines lit up the smoke-filled air as it climbed toward the safety of space. Inside that shuttle were the 11 other humans from her squad along with their alien teammates. Every single one of them knew that Hana Kim was still alive and trapped in the ruins of Building 7. Sergeant Lee Minho had been her closest friend in the unit. They had joined the coalition forces at the same time and had watched each other's backs through 3 major campaigns. Just last week, he had promised that humans needed to stick together because no one else would look out for them. Now he was flying away to safety while she remained pinned under concrete, waiting for the Nexari to find her. The sound of clicking grew louder as the insect warriors moved through the abandoned coalition base. They were searching for survivors and would eventually make their way to her location. Hana knew that humans captured by the Nexari were usually killed quickly. The aliens did not take prisoners because they had no use for other species except as food sources. She tried one more time to free her leg from the concrete, but it was hopeless without help. The chunk of building was simply too heavy for one person to move. Her sidearm had 15 rounds left, and she had 2 grenades attached to her belt. When the Nexari found her, she would take as many of them with her as possible. But as she listened to the alien sounds getting closer, Hana felt something change inside her mind. The fear and desperation were still there, but they were being pushed aside by something else. Anger was growing in her chest like a fire that burned hotter with each passing second. These creatures had destroyed her base, killed her friends, and now they were coming to finish the job. More importantly, her own teammates had abandoned her to die alone on this hostile planet. They had made a choice to save themselves rather than risk anything to help her. Commander Quinn Thor had calculated that her life was worth less than the slight delay it would take to rescue her. The other humans in her squad had agreed with that decision. As the clicking sounds grew even closer, Hana Kim made a decision that would change everything. She was not going to die here alone and forgotten. Somehow she was going to survive this nightmare, and when she did, the people who had abandoned her would learn what a terrible mistake they had made. The Nexari had no idea that they were about to encounter a human who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. In 3 days, they would discover that leaving Hana Kim for dead was the worst tactical error of their entire campaign. Hana Kim crouched behind a storage container near the edge of the Nexari camp, as the morning sun cast long shadows across the alien settlement. She had been observing the insect warriors for over an hour, trying to understand the complex social dynamics that governed their behavior. What she witnessed next would change her understanding of the enemy forever and give her the key to an impossible victory. 2 large Nexari commanders emerged from separate sections of the camp and began moving toward each other in what appeared to be an aggressive confrontation. Both creatures were massive specimens standing nearly 8 feet tall, with thick, armored carapaces covered in intricate markings that indicated high rank. Their claws were extended, and their compound eyes glowed with an angry red light that Hana had never seen before. The first commander had blue and silver markings across its shell, while the second displayed gold and black patterns that seemed to shift in the sunlight as they approached each other. The entire camp began to react. Other Nexari stopped their activities and formed loose circles around the 2 leaders, creating an arena for what was clearly about to become a territorial dispute. Hana expected to see a violent physical battle, like the ones described in coalition intelligence reports about Nexari behavior. But instead of attacking each other immediately, the 2 commanders began a strange ritual that involved releasing different chemical signals into the air. The scents were so strong that even Hana could detect them from her hiding position. The blue and silver commander released a sharp, bitter smell that made the nearby worker Nexari back away nervously. In response, the gold and black commander produced a sweet, flowery scent that seemed to calm the agitated workers. This chemical exchange continued for several minutes, with each leader trying to assert dominance through increasingly complex combinations of pheromone signals. What fascinated Hana was how the other Nexari reacted to these chemical communications. The workers and smaller warriors were not just watching the confrontation, they were being directly influenced by the pheromone signals. Each time one of the commanders released a new scent combination, different groups of Nexari would change their behavior. Some became more aggressive, while others showed submission or confusion. The gold and black commander eventually produced a pheromone signal so powerful that it caused every Nexari within 50 yards to freeze in place. The blue and silver commander tried to counter with its own chemical display, but the response was weaker and less coordinated. Within minutes, it was clear that the gold and black commander had won the territorial dispute through superior chemical communication rather than physical combat. The defeated commander immediately changed its posture to show submission, lowering its head and folding its claws against its body. All of the Nexari that had been following the blue and silver commander now transferred their loyalty to the victor. The entire power structure of that section of the camp had changed in less than 30 minutes without a single drop of blood being spilled. This revelation hit Hana like lightning. The Nexari were not controlled by some mysterious hive mind as coalition scientists had theorized. Instead, they operated through an incredibly sophisticated chemical communication system that was far more complex than anything humans had discovered. The queen did not telepathically control her subjects. She commanded them through carefully crafted pheromone signals that triggered biological responses. For the next several hours, Hana watched similar interactions. Throughout the camp, she began to identify patterns in how different chemical signals affected Nexari behavior. Sharp acidic scents seemed to trigger fear responses, while earthy organic smells indicated territorial claims. Sweet floral pheromones were used for mating rituals and social bonding, while bitter compounds signaled aggression or dominance challenges. More importantly, she realized that the Nexari chemical language had a grammar and syntax, just like spoken languages. Simple scents conveyed basic emotions or commands, but complex combinations could transmit detailed tactical information, social hierarchies, and even abstract concepts. The queen was essentially broadcasting a constant stream of chemical instructions that kept the entire colony functioning as a coordinated unit. By midday, Hana had identified the specific plants and minerals on the planet that could be used to synthesize Nexari pheromone signals. She began collecting samples and experimenting with different combinations in a hidden location away from the camp. Her first attempts produced only crude approximations of basic emotional signals, but each success taught her more about the underlying chemical grammar. The real breakthrough came when Hana discovered a cluster of rare purple crystals growing near an underground water source. These crystals produced a mineral compound that was almost identical to the base element used in all Nexari dominance pheromones. By grinding the crystals into powder and mixing them with specific plant extracts, she could create artificial command signals that were nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. Her first test involved directing a small group of worker Nexari to change their route while carrying supplies. The workers responded immediately to her synthesized pheromone command and began moving in the direction she had indicated. None of them seemed to question where the chemical order had come from. They simply obeyed, as if it had been transmitted by their queen. Encouraged by this success, Hana attempted more complex commands. She directed scouts to report false information about patrol routes. She caused maintenance workers to abandon their tasks and move to different areas of the camp. She even managed to make two medium-sized warriors start a minor territorial dispute by broadcasting conflicting dominance signals. Each successful manipulation taught Hana more about the nuances of Nexari chemical communication. She learned that timing was crucial because pheromone signals had to be released in specific sequences to convey complex meanings. She discovered that concentration levels determined how many Nexari would be affected by a given command, and most importantly, she realized that the chemical language included safeguards to prevent unauthorized commands from disrupting the colony structure. The safeguards were based on scent signatures that identified the source of each pheromone signal. The Queen had a unique chemical signature that marked all of her commands as legitimate, while lower-ranking Nexari could only give orders to those beneath them in the hierarchy. But Hana noticed that these safeguards were not perfect. They relied on biological recognition systems that could potentially be fooled by sufficiently accurate chemical mimicry. As evening approached, Hana began planning her most ambitious experiment, yet she had identified the camp's second-in-command, a large warrior queen named Vex Thara, who seemed to be growing dissatisfied with the primary queen's leadership. Vex Thara had been showing signs of territorial ambition and had been testing the limits of her authority by giving increasingly bold commands to her subordinates. Hana realized that she could potentially manipulate this existing tension to cause a leadership change in the camp. If she could make Vex Thara believe that the primary queen was weak or giving contradictory orders, she might be able to trigger a challenge for control. The key would be creating the right combination of pheromone signals to make both queens appear to be undermining each other. The plan was incredibly dangerous, because if either queen detected artificial pheromone signals, they would immediately launch a colony-wide search for intruders. But it was also Hana's best chance to gain control over the Nexari force. Instead of trying to influence hundreds of individual warriors, she could potentially command the entire army by controlling whoever emerged as the dominant queen. As night fell over the alien planet, Hana Kim prepared to attempt something that no human had ever tried before. She was going to start a revolution in a Nexari colony, using nothing but carefully crafted chemical signals. The girl who had been abandoned by her own species was about to prove that human intelligence and adaptability could overcome any enemy, no matter how alien or powerful. Tomorrow she would either control an army of humanity's greatest enemies, or she would die in the most spectacular failure in military history. But tonight she allowed herself to feel something she had not experienced since being left for dead. Hope was growing in her chest like a warm fire. And for the first time in 3 days, Hana Kim believed she might actually survive this impossible situation. The chemical revolution was about to begin. Dawn broke over the Nexari camp as Hana Kim prepared to execute the most dangerous plan of her life. She had spent the entire night creating complex pheromone mixtures from the purple crystals and plant extracts she had collected. Her hands were steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt, but her heart was racing with anticipation and fear. The primary queen had emerged from her chamber earlier than usual and was already broadcasting her morning command signals to the colony. Hana could smell the complex chemical messages that instructed different groups of Nexari to begin their daily tasks. But she also detected something else in the air: tension between the primary queen and her ambitious second-in-command. Vex Thara had been growing bolder in recent days, questioning some of the primary queen's decisions and pushing the boundaries of her own authority. The warrior queen commanded nearly half of the camp's military forces and had been making increasingly aggressive displays of dominance toward other high-ranking Nexari. This existing conflict was exactly what Hana needed to exploit. From her hiding position behind a cluster of equipment containers, Hana began releasing her first artificial pheromone signal. It was designed to mimic the primary queen's chemical signature, but with subtle alterations that would make her commands seem weak and uncertain. The scent carried across the camp on the morning breeze, reaching the sensitive antennae of every Nexari in the area. Within minutes, Hana could see the effects of her manipulation. Several groups of worker Nexari began moving hesitantly, as if they were receiving conflicting instructions. Some stopped their tasks entirely, while others started projects they had abandoned the day before. The confusion was spreading throughout the colony as the artificial signals interfered with the Queen's normal command structure. Vex Thara noticed the disruption immediately. Her massive form emerged from the military section of the camp, and her compound eyes swept across the confused workers with obvious displeasure. The warrior queen began releasing her own pheromone signals, attempting to restore order. But Hana was ready for this response. She immediately broadcast a second set of chemical signals that appeared to come from the primary queen. These artificial commands directly contradicted the orders that Vex Thara was giving to her subordinates, creating a chemical argument between the two queens that every Nexari in the camp could smell. The worker-class insects began showing signs of extreme stress as they received impossible, conflicting instructions. The primary queen sensed the challenge to her authority and responded, with a powerful burst of dominance pheromones that should have silenced any lesser Nexari. But Hana had anticipated this reaction and was prepared with her most sophisticated chemical manipulation. Yet, she released a complex mixture that made it appear as if Vexthara was not only ignoring the primary queen's commands but was actively mocking them. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Vexthara interpreted the artificial signals as a direct insult to her status and began preparing for a formal challenge to the primary queen's leadership. The warrior queen's carapace turned a deep red color that indicated extreme aggression, while her claws extended to their full length. The other Nexari in the camp recognized these signs and began forming the traditional circle for a leadership combat. Hana watched from her hiding place as the two queens approached each other in the center of the camp. The air was thick with competing pheromone signals as each tried to assert dominance over the other. But the artificial chemicals that Hana continued to release were making both queens appear weak and indecisive to their subordinates. The colony was beginning to fragment as different groups of Nexari started following conflicting chemical commands. The formal challenge began with an exchange of ritual pheromone signals that declared each queen's right to rule. The primary queen released the traditional dominance markers that had established her authority over the colony for the past 3 years. But Vexthara responded with an even more complex chemical display that incorporated battle honors and territorial claims from her military campaigns. What neither queen realized was that Hana was carefully monitoring their chemical exchanges and subtly altering the pheromone signals before they reached the watching crowd of Nexari. She made the primary queen's commands seem desperate and confused while enhancing Vexthara's displays of strength and confidence. The manipulation was so subtle that neither queen detected the artificial interference. The physical combat phase of the challenge was brief but brutal. Nexari leadership disputes were traditionally settled through single combat, with the winner taking complete control of the colony. The primary queen was older and more experienced, but Vexthara was younger and more aggressive. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes before Vexthara delivered the killing blow with her razor-sharp claws. As the new dominant queen, Vexthara immediately began asserting her authority over the entire colony. But she was unknowingly responding to the artificial pheromone signals that Hana continued to broadcast from her hiding position. The chemical commands appeared to be coming from Vexthara's own scent glands, but were actually being generated by Hana's sophisticated mixture of synthesized compounds. Hana's first test of her control was simple. She directed Vexthara to reorganize the camp guard rotations. The new queen responded, immediately releasing the appropriate pheromone commands to her subordinate warriors. Within an hour, the entire defensive structure of the camp had been changed according to Hana's specifications. None of the Nexari questioned these orders because they appeared to come directly from their new leader. Encouraged by this success, Hana began implementing more complex manipulations. She directed Vexthara to relocate critical equipment and supplies to different areas of the camp. She ordered changes to patrol schedules that would create gaps in the colony's security. She even managed to have several key intelligence assets moved to locations where she could access them more easily. The most important manipulation involved the camp's communication system. Hana used her control over Vexthara to send messages to other Nexari colonies throughout the sector. The artificial pheromone signals commanded these distant outposts to send reinforcements to the mining planet, ostensibly for a major offensive against human settlements. But Hana had something entirely different planned for when these additional forces arrived. By late afternoon, Hana had achieved something unprecedented in the history of human-alien relations. She was effectively commanding a Nexari military force through chemical manipulation of their leadership. The colony now contained over 2,000 warrior-class Nexari, along with their support personnel and equipment. All of them were unknowingly following orders that originated from a single human hiding in the ruins of her former base. The irony was not lost on Hana that she had been abandoned by her own species, only to gain command of their greatest enemy. But she was not finished with her manipulations yet. The reinforcements She had summoned would arrive within 24 hours, and she needed to prepare for the most important phase of her plan. As evening approached, Hana began broadcasting the pheromone signals that would bring her former squadmates back to the planet. The artificial commands made it appear that the Nexari were massing for a major assault on nearby human colonies. Coalition intelligence would detect the unusual enemy activity and send a response force to investigate. And Hana knew exactly who would be leading that response force. Commander Quinn Thor and the rest of her former squad would return to the planet expecting to find a heavily fortified enemy position. Instead, they would discover that the human girl they had left for dead now commanded the very forces they had come to fight. The thought of seeing their faces when they realized what she had accomplished filled Hana with a satisfaction that was almost as sweet as the victory itself. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation between Hana and the people who had abandoned her. But tonight she allowed herself to savor the impossible achievement she had pulled off in just 3 days. The girl who had been considered expendable by her own allies had proven that human intelligence and determination could overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it appeared. The abandoned soldier had become a queen, and her army was waiting for orders. Hana Kim waited in the darkness for 3 hours after the last shuttle disappeared into the night sky. The clicking sounds of the Nexari search parties had moved past her hiding spot twice, but somehow they had not found her yet. She knew this luck would not last much longer. The insect warriors were thorough in their hunting and would eventually check every piece of rubble in the destroyed base. When the sounds finally faded into the distance, Hana began working on freeing her trapped leg. Again, she used a piece of twisted metal from the collapsed wall as a lever and slowly applied pressure to the concrete chunk. After 30 minutes of careful work, she felt the heavy piece shift slightly. The pain in her leg was terrible, but she gritted her teeth and kept pushing. Finally, the concrete moved enough for her to pull her leg free. The limb was badly bruised and hurt with every step, but nothing seemed to be broken. She gathered her weapons and what little equipment she could. Carrie then began moving carefully through the ruins toward the edge of the base. She needed to find a safe place to hide and plan her next move. The Nexari had set up a temporary camp about half a mile from the destroyed coalition base. Hana could see their strange blue lights glowing in the darkness and hear the constant clicking sounds they made when communicating. Most human soldiers would have tried to move away from the enemy camp to find shelter elsewhere. But Hana had always been different from other humans in ways that even she did not fully understand. During her 6 years of military service, she had spent countless hours studying alien behavior patterns, while other soldiers focused on weapons training or physical fitness. She read every intelligence report about enemy species and watched recorded battle footage until she could predict how different aliens would react in various situations. Her commanding officers thought this was just an unusual hobby, but Hana knew it was something more important. She had noticed things about the Nexari that other humans missed. During previous battles, she had seen patterns in their movements that suggested they were not just mindless insects following simple instincts. They had complex social structures and communication systems that most coalition forces did not understand. The military briefings always described them as savage creatures driven only by hunger and aggression, but Hana suspected there was much more to their society. Now, as she crept closer to their camp, she began to see proof of her theories. The Nexari were not randomly scattered around their temporary base. Instead, they were organized into clear groups with different functions. Some of the smaller ones appeared to be scouts or messengers, while the larger warriors seemed to have guard duties. The biggest ones with the most elaborate markings on their shells were clearly leaders giving orders to the others. Hana found a hiding spot behind some large rocks about 200 yards from the camp and settled in to observe. She pulled out a small notebook and began writing down everything she saw. The way different types of Nexari moved around the camp, the sounds they made when communicating with each other, the body language they used to show submission or dominance. Most importantly, she began to notice that they seemed to respond to chemical signals rather than spoken words. The smaller Nexari would approach the larger ones and touch them with their antennae before receiving what appeared to be instructions. This suggested they were using scent or pheromone communication rather than the clicking sounds that humans always focused on. The clicking might just be Background noise while the real communication happened through chemical signals that human senses could not detect. As dawn approached, Hana realized she had discovered something that could change everything humans knew about fighting the Nexari. If they really communicated through chemical signals, then it might be possible to interfere with those signals, or even mimic them. The planet they were on had many strange plants and minerals that produced unusual chemical compounds. Perhaps some of those substances could be used to confuse or manipulate Nexari behavior. She spent the first day gathering samples from the local plant life and testing how the Nexari reacted to different scents. When she crushed certain purple flowers, the scout Nexari would change their patrol routes. When she burned specific types of moss, the larger warriors would become more aggressive toward each other. It was like she had found the key to their basic instincts. By the second day, Hana had developed a crude understanding of how Nexari chemical communication worked. Submission signals seemed to involve sweet-smelling compounds, while dominance markers were more bitter and sharp. Fear responses were triggered by acidic scents, while territorial claims involved earthy organic smells. She began mixing different plant extracts to create artificial versions of these chemical signals. Her first real test came when a small Nexari scout wandered away from the main camp to investigate some unusual noises Hana had made. She covered herself in the submission scent compounds and stepped out from behind her hiding place. The scout stopped and examined her with its large compound eyes, but instead of attacking it, simply clicked once and returned to its patrol route. The success was incredible but also terrifying. Hana realized she had just convinced a Nexari warrior that she was not a threat by speaking to it in its own chemical language. No human had ever accomplished anything like this before, but she also knew that one small test was not enough. She needed to try something much more ambitious if she wanted to survive the next 24 hours. During the second night, Hana began preparing for the most dangerous experiment of her life. She had identified what appeared to be the camp supply depot where the Nexari stored food and equipment. If she could get inside that area, she might be able to learn more about their organization and possibly find something useful for her. Escape attempt. She covered herself in the strongest submission scents she could create and added some of the chemical markers that seemed to indicate work duty assignments. Then she gathered pieces of shed Nexari shell fragments that she had found around old battle sites and attached them to her clothing as a crude disguise. The shell pieces would not fool close inspection, but in dim light they might make her silhouette look more like a Nexari worker. Just before dawn, when the Nexari guards were changing shifts, Hana made her move. She walked slowly toward the camp, trying to mimic the six-legged gait of the insect warriors. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure the aliens would hear it, but she forced herself to keep moving at the steady pace she had observed in the worker-class Nexari. The first guard she encountered was one of the medium-sized warriors with yellow markings on its carapace. It looked at her briefly, then clicked twice and pointed toward the supply area. With one of its clawed limbs, Hana could barely believe what was happening. The chemical disguise was actually working. The Nexari guard thought she was supposed to be there. She spent the next 2 hours moving through the camp and learning things that would have taken Coalition intelligence months to discover. The Nexari were not just raiding this planet for resources, they were building a permanent breeding facility that would produce thousands of new warriors every month. They also had detailed maps showing planned attacks on 3 nearby human colonies. More importantly, Hana discovered that the camp was controlled by a massive queen Nexari, who stayed in the largest structure at the center of the base. This queen seemed to coordinate all the other Nexari through chemical signals that traveled through the air. The entire camp was like one giant organism, with the queen as its brain and all the other insects as its limbs and organs. As the sun rose higher, Hana knew she had to leave. The camp before her disguise was discovered in better light, but as she prepared to sneak away, she realized something that made her change her entire plan. She was not going to run away from this camp. She was going to take control of it. The queen was the key to everything. If Hana could somehow influence or control the queen, she could potentially command the entire Nexari force. The idea was completely insane and probably impossible, but it was also the only chance she had to turn her desperate situation into something that might save not just her own life, but thousands of other human lives as well. For the first time since being abandoned by her squad, Hana Kim smiled. She had spent 2 days learning to speak the chemical language of humanity's greatest enemy. Now she was going to use that knowledge to attempt something that would either make her the most important human in the galaxy or get her killed in the most spectacular way possible. The girl who had been left for dead was about to try to steal an army. The coalition dropships appeared in the morning sky exactly as Hana Kim had predicted, their engines roaring as they descended toward the planet's surface. She stood at the edge of the Nexari camp watching through a pair of captured binoculars as the familiar shapes of human and alien military transports broke through the cloud cover. Her heart was beating fast, but not from fear. This time she was ready for them. Commander Quinn Thor was leading the assault force, just as she had expected. So, tall blue-skinned Veltar had brought 3 full squadrons of mixed-species troops, along with heavy weapons and armored vehicles. They were prepared for a major battle against what their intelligence reports described as the largest Nexari buildup ever recorded in this sector. What they were not prepared for was the truth. Behind Hana stood 3,000 Nexari warriors, organized in perfect military formations. The insect soldiers held their weapons at ready, but they were not pointing them at the approaching coalition forces. Instead, they waited in disciplined ranks for orders from their human commander through the chemical signals she transmitted to Queen Vex Thara. The coalition forces landed in the same clearing where Hana had been abandoned 4 days earlier. The irony was not lost on her as she watched the soldiers deploy into defensive positions around their landing zone. They had no idea that every move they made was being observed and reported by Nexari scouts who were following Hana's orders rather than their natural instincts. Commander Quinn Thor emerged from the lead transport, wearing full battle armor and carrying the same plasma rifle he had been holding when he decided to leave Hana behind his squad. Leaders gathered around him for a tactical briefing, but Hana could see the confusion on their faces. The expected Nexari attack had not materialized, and the enemy camp appeared strangely quiet. Through her binoculars, Hana could identify several members of her former squad. Sergeant Lee Minho was setting up a heavy weapons position near the landing zone, while Lieutenant Park Ji-ho was directing reconnaissance drones toward the Nexari camp. These were the same people who had abandoned her to save themselves, and now they were walking into a trap that she had spent 3 days preparing. Hana activated the portable communicator she had taken from the coalition base ruins and tuned it to the standard military frequency. She took a deep breath and spoke into the device, knowing that her voice would carry across the battlefield to the soldiers who had left her for dead coalition forces. "This is Lieutenant Hana Kim requesting immediate ceasefire and parley," she said in a calm, clear voice. "All units stand down and prepare for diplomatic contact. I repeat, this is Lieutenant Kim requesting parley." The effect of her transmission was immediate and dramatic. The coalition soldiers froze in their positions as they heard the voice of someone they believed was dead. Commander Quinn Thor grabbed his own communicator and spoke into it with obvious shock and disbelief. "Lieutenant Kim, this is Commander Quinn Thor. How are you alive? What is your current status? Are you being held prisoner by hostile forces?" Hana smiled as she heard the confusion in the commander's voice. She could imagine the chaos in the coalition ranks as they tried to understand how she had survived the Nexari assault and why she was requesting diplomatic contact. Instead of immediate extraction, "Negative, Commander, I am not a prisoner," she replied. "I am currently in command of the Nexari forces in this sector, and I am offering terms for their surrender to coalition control. Please prepare for formal negotiation." The silence that followed her transmission lasted for nearly a minute. Hana could see the coalition soldiers looking at each other in confusion, while their officers tried to process what they had just heard. The idea that a human could command Nexari forces was so impossible that many of them probably thought they were hearing some kind of enemy trick. Commander Quinn Thor finally responded, his voice tight with suspicion. "Lieutenant Kim, if you are really in control of enemy forces, then prove it. Have them perform some kind of demonstration that shows they are following your orders." Hana had been expecting this request and was ready with her response. She transmitted a complex series of pheromone commands to Queen Vex Thara, who immediately began relaying orders to her subordinates. Within minutes, the entire Nexari force began moving in a coordinated display that no human military unit could have imagined. 3,000 insect warriors marched in perfect formation across the open ground between the camp and the coalition landing zone. They moved in precise geometric patterns that spelled out human letters visible from above. The message they formed was simple but unmistakable. Surrender to Hana Kim. The display continued. For 10 minutes before the Nexari returned to their original positions, the coalition forces watched this demonstration in stunned silence. Many of the soldiers had lowered their weapons without realizing it as they stared at the impossible sight of Nexari troops following complex human commands. The psychological impact was exactly what Hana had hoped for. Her former teammates were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about this war had changed. Commander Quinn Thor transmitted again, his voice now showing a mixture of amazement and growing respect. Lieutenant Kim, request permission to approach your position for face-to-face negotiation. Will guarantee safe passage for all parties involved. Hana considered the request carefully. She had achieved her primary objective of proving that she had survived and gained control of enemy forces. But she also wanted to see the expressions on their faces when they realized the full extent of what she had accomplished. Permission. Granted, Commander, she replied. Approach with minimal escort to coordinates I am transmitting. Any aggressive action will result in immediate termination of negotiations. 20 minutes later, Commander Quinn Thor walked across the battlefield accompanied only by Sergeant Lee Minho and Lieutenant Park Ji-ho. The three aliens moved carefully through the organized ranks of Nexari warriors who watched them pass with curious compound eyes, but made no threatening moves. The insect soldiers were clearly under strict orders to allow the coalition representatives safe passage. Hana stepped out from behind Queen Vex Thara to meet her former teammates face to face. The shock on their faces was everything she had hoped it would be. Commander Quinn Thor actually stumbled backward when he saw her alive and clearly in command of the situation. Sergeant Lee Minho dropped his sidearm while Lieutenant Park Ji-ho stared at her with his mouth hanging open. She was no longer the desperate soldier who had begged for rescue from the collapsed building. Her uniform had been replaced with a mixture of human and Nexari equipment that marked her as something entirely new. Her confidence was obvious in every movement and gesture, while behind her stood the largest enemy army any of them had ever seen. Commander, she said with a slight smile, I believe we have some things to discuss. The conversation that followed would change the course of the galactic war. Commander Quinn Thor tried to reassert his authority by demanding that Hana follow standard military protocols and submit to debriefing. But Hana made it clear that she was no longer taking orders from anyone. The coalition would have to negotiate with her as an equal, or face the consequences of fighting an enemy army under human command. Lieutenant Park Ji-ho asked the question that everyone was thinking. How did you survive? How did you gain control of these forces? What do you want from us? Hana looked at each of her former teammates before, answering, I survived because I refused to give up. I gained control because I understood our enemy better than our own intelligence services. And what I want is simple. I want the coalition to recognize that humanity deserves better treatment than being used as expendable cannon fodder. The negotiation continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The coalition had no choice but to accept Hana's terms. She would command the Nexari forces in this sector as an independent ally. Rather than a subordinate, the war would continue. But now it would be fought with human intelligence directing enemy resources against their former masters, as the sun set over the alien planet. Hana Kim stood between two armies that had been enemies. Just days before, the girl who had been abandoned for dead had become the most important human in the galaxy. Not through military rank or political power, but through pure determination and intelligence. The coalition would never again consider any human soldier expendable because they now knew what one determined human could accomplish when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted in ways that no one could have predicted. Hana Kim had returned from the dead commanding an army, and the galaxy would never be the same.